We were three friends looking to get away for the weekend, just a break from the hustle, a chance to unwind and relax. We'd been planning this trip for months, ever since school had ended and we'd finally gotten the time off. It was supposed to be the perfect weekend, spent in a cozy cabin tucked away somewhere in Tennessee. Quiet, away from the noise, a place to reconnect and just forget about everything for a while. The cabin itself looked picturesque when we arrived. It had a rustic charm to it, with wood paneling that creaked and the smell of pine. The porch was lined with rocking chairs, the kind you'd imagine on the front of a mountain lodge, and the view was breathtaking. The surrounding trees created a sort of peaceful silence, making everything feel far away from the world we left behind. The first night, we were pretty casual. We threw on some music, cracked open a couple of beers, and just hung out. We didn't need much. We were just happy to be there. No real plans for the next day except for maybe hiking and chilling out. We were laughing, talking about everything and nothing. You know, the kind of evening where time flies without you noticing. That's when it started. I had no idea what was going on at first. One of my friends, Jamie, started messing with the smoke detector. She was on the couch, fiddling with it like she'd found something odd. And when I looked over, I noticed she was holding it up to her face, squinting at it. "I think there's a weird blinking light on this thing," she said, her voice a little more serious than usual. "It's like too regular to just be a malfunction." First, we all brushed it off. It was probably nothing, right? Just a glitch in the detector. But Jamie kept messing with it, tapping at it like she was trying to get it to stop. It wasn't long before she started looking around the room, shifting the smoke detector this way and that, as if she was looking for something. "I swear, this thing is too off," she muttered. She walked across the room, taking the detector with her, and we followed her. She kept fiddling with it, trying to pull it apart or something. I don't even know what she was hoping to find. Then, all of a sudden, she stopped. "This isn't just a smoke detector," she said, her voice low, and she had this weird expression on her face like she just realized something. We all crowded around her, peering at the little device she held in her hands. That's when we saw it. A small lens, barely noticeable, hidden under the edge of the smoke detector. It wasn't just a blinking light, it was a camera. There, clear as day, was a tiny camera, no bigger than a pinhead, embedded into the smoke detector. It was angled just right so it could capture the entire room, the couch, the table, everything. My stomach dropped. "What the hell?" I whispered, half in disbelief, half in panic. Jamie's face was pale, her hands trembling. "We need to look around. Now." At that point, we started looking more closely at the rest of the cabin. Our lighthearted mood evaporated, replaced by something darker. We found the next one in the bathroom. It was hidden behind the towel rack, with the same tiny lens that blended in perfectly with the wall. We didn't even know how we missed it. Could have been there for who knows how long. After that, we checked the bedroom, the one we'd all been sleeping in. It was tucked in the corner, near the ceiling, almost camouflaged against the light fixture. We could barely make it out, but once we spotted it, we knew. That was the third camera. The fourth one was in the living room, discreetly hidden in a little decorative shelf, positioned so it could see the whole area. Every angle of the cabin was covered. We were being watched. There was no question about it anymore. My heart started racing. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. We had rented this cabin through a legitimate booking site with good reviews. There was no reason to suspect anything like this would happen. How could it happen? We were all too freaked out to sleep. We tried to act normal at first, but the sense of being watched was too heavy. We didn't know what to do, so we did the one thing we figured might help. We called the cops. We explained everything to the dispatcher, who seemed to take it seriously enough. The sheriff's department was close enough that they said they'd send someone out soon. We hung up, but it didn't make any of us feel better. We sat there, tense, waiting for the authorities to arrive, each of us processing what had just happened in our own way. The sheriff arrived within the hour. He looked like he'd seen it all before. Too calm, too experienced. He listened as we explained what we'd found, and he didn't seem nearly as shocked as I thought he'd be. "Yeah," he said after a long pause. This kind of thing happens more than you'd think. I'm sorry to tell you, but it's unfortunately common in some tourist spots. People think they're safe, but not everyone who rents out these places has good intentions. His words hit us like a ton of bricks. This wasn't a one-time thing. This had happened before, and it probably would happen again. The sheriff said they'd send a tech team to investigate the cameras, but they weren't sure what kind of evidence they'd be able to get. The cabin owner was contacted, and after some back and forth, they denied everything. Of course, they did. They probably had no idea how long the cameras had been there or how many other people had been watched before us. But it didn't matter. The sheriff told us that it was almost impossible to prove anything without the recordings, and even then, the cameras could have been removed by the time they checked. We stayed there, nervously trying to figure out what to do next. We didn't feel safe anymore. It wasn't the cabin we'd rented, but what had been done to it. The thought of someone watching us, knowing everything we said, everything we did, that was too much to stomach. We didn't stay the rest of the weekend. We packed our bags, left the cabin in the middle of the night, and drove back home, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The sheriff had told us we could press charges, but we all knew that wouldn't bring back the feeling of safety. It wouldn't undo what had already been done. That whole trip, the whole weekend, went from a relaxing getaway to a nightmare. Every time I think about it, I get a sick feeling in my stomach. I don't know who was watching or why they did it, but I can't forget the thought that someone had been watching us while we thought we were safe. And that's the scariest part of all. The fear of knowing how little control we really have. How easy it is for someone to invade your privacy without you ever knowing. And what's even worse is thinking about how much they might have seen before we found those cameras. It still gives me chills. I can't stop thinking about it. How it all seemed normal at first, how everything felt safe, and then, just like that, it all turned into something we couldn't undo. I had been looking forward to the quiet of the mountains for weeks. A break from the noise of city life, a chance to clear my head. The cabin I rented was tucked away in the hills of West Virginia, miles from the nearest neighbor, and the kind of place that seemed perfect for solitude. The owner assured me the place had been vacant for weeks before my arrival. It had been advertised online as a charming, rustic getaway with all the basic amenities, and I couldn't wait to settle in and enjoy a few days of peace. When I first arrived, the cabin looked exactly as I'd imagined, shrouded by tall trees and nestled against the edge of the woods. The weather was perfect, cool and crisp, with the scent of pine in the air. The cabin itself was simple, made of rough-hewn logs, and though it had all the comforts of home, there was an undeniable sense of isolation to it. I unlocked the front door, the creaky sound of the old wood giving way as I stepped inside. The place was dusty but cozy, with a fireplace in the living room, a small kitchen, and a single staircase that led up to a small loft bedroom. I immediately felt the weight of silence. It was strange how quiet it was, so still it almost felt like the world had been paused. But that was fine. I was there to unwind, not to be surrounded by noise. After a long day of driving, I decided to unpack. I didn't want to waste any time. The bed upstairs was inviting, with a thick quilt draped over it, and I could already picture myself curling up with a good book. But before I could settle in, I needed to put away my clothes. The upstairs bedroom had a small dresser with a few drawers. The old wood creaked under my touch as I opened the first one. Inside was an odd collection of items, keys, a wallet, and a half-finished notebook. At first, I didn't think much of it. It didn't seem out of place. But as I sifted through the drawer, something caught my eye. The notebook, though well-worn, still had pages clearly scribbled on, the ink fresh despite the obvious age of the paper. The dates at the top of the pages told a story of someone who had been there recently. One entry was dated 2 days before I arrived. I stared at the notebook, heart racing, a strange chill running down my spine. I turned the page to read the entry. It was personal, almost like a journal of thoughts. The writing was messy, a hurried scrawl, but the words were clear. Whoever had written in it had been staying in the cabin recently. The entry seemed to be a stream of consciousness. Someone who was struggling with something, maybe feeling trapped or confused. The words mentioned waiting for the right time and hoping this would be over soon, followed by something about not feeling like they were alone here anymore. I shut the notebook quickly, the unsettling feeling settling deeper in my stomach. I tried to brush it off as coincidence. It was an old cabin, after all, and it's not uncommon for people to leave behind small things like that. But the wallet, my eyes kept returning to it. I took it out, checking inside, half expecting to find nothing but old receipts or change. But no, it had identification, a driver's license, a credit card, and a few pictures of a family. I put the wallet down quickly, my hands now shaking. There was no explanation for any of this. The keys, the wallet, the notebook from 2 days ago. It didn't add up. I rushed downstairs to call the owner. My fingers fumbled with the phone as I dialed. When the owner picked up, I tried to stay calm. I explained what I had found in the drawer, the keys, the wallet, and the notebook with a recent entry. There was a long pause on the other end, followed by the owner's voice. "No one has been there in over a month," they insisted almost defensively. "I swear, that place has been vacant. You must have misunderstood." I didn't know what to make of it. How could I have misunderstood? The writing in the notebook, the items in the drawer, they all pointed to someone being there very recently. It didn't make sense. "I'm telling you, no one's been there," the owner said, their voice now growing tense. "You're probably just overthinking it." But I couldn't let it go. There was something wrong. I didn't feel safe anymore. I wanted to believe it was just a misunderstanding, a weird coincidence, but everything about it felt wrong. The whole situation was off, and the strange feeling in the pit of my stomach kept growing stronger. After hanging up, I wandered around the cabin, checking every room, trying to distract myself, but nothing felt right. The stillness was suffocating, and it was as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone was just out of sight. The hours passed slowly, and the shadows grew longer as the sun began to dip behind the mountains. By evening, I had decided that I couldn't stay another night in that cabin. It wasn't just the items I found in the drawer or the weirdness of the situation. It was the gut feeling I had that something wasn't right. The eerie quiet, the feeling of being watched, the sense that I wasn't alone in that cabin, despite all the assurances I had been given. I packed my bags quickly, my heart pounding with every sound that seemed to echo around me. The wind had picked up outside, howling through the trees, and the sound of the branches scraping against the cabin made everything feel even more unsettling. The darkening sky only added to the sense of urgency. I locked the door behind me and stepped out onto the porch, my bags in hand, ready to leave. I didn't even care to check if the car keys I found matched anything in the cabin. I had to go. I needed to get out of there. As I drove down the winding road that led back to town, I couldn't help but feel like I was being followed. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see headlights behind me, or worse, a shadowy figure in the distance. But no, there was nothing, just the empty road and the dark, silent trees. When I finally reached the main road, I didn't stop driving. I drove through the night, straight through the next town, all the way to a motel where I felt, for the first time in hours, like I could finally breathe. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me, lurking just beyond my line of sight. The next day, I called the owner again, but this time I wasn't looking for answers. I didn't care about the explanation anymore. I just wanted to be done with it. I had checked out of the cabin, left everything behind, and driven away as quickly as I could. The owner didn't sound surprised when I told them I had left. "I told you no one had been there. I didn't know what you were talking about with the items in the drawer," they said. "But I'm sorry you had a bad experience." That was the last I ever heard from the owner, and I never looked back. The cabin, the keys, the wallet, and the notebook were all part of a mystery that I would never solve. I'm not sure what happened there, but one thing I know for certain: something was wrong about that place. I don't know who had been staying there before me or why they left those things behind, but I know I wasn't the first person to feel uneasy in that cabin. And whatever was there, waiting, never left. We were deep in rural Arkansas, way out in the woods, far enough that our phones stopped getting any kind of signal about an hour before we even got to the cabin. It was my cousin Matt's family place. More like a hunting cabin, really nothing fancy. Just a square wooden box with a front porch, no insulation, old furniture, and a wood-burning stove in the corner that smoked if you fed it too much too fast. No one had been out there in years. His dad used to come with his brothers for deer season, but after the old man got sick, no one really kept it up. Matt had the idea to spend a long weekend out there, get away from everything, breathe some quiet air. I was in the middle of burnout from work and needed it bad. We drove up in Matt's truck, bouncing along gravel roads that turned into dirt paths barely wide enough for the tires. It was already late afternoon by the time we pulled in, trees tall and close on all sides. The air had that sharp, leafy smell of fall. Dead leaves crackled under our boots when we got out. The cabin looked about like I expected. Dusty, old, leaning a little like it had grown tired over the years. We spent the first hour clearing out cobwebs, dusting off the chairs, checking the corners for anything alive. There were a few spider nests in the corners, a wasp nest under the eave long dead. We set up our cots and sleeping bags in the main room and lit a fire in the stove. Dinner was canned chili heated over a propane burner. We had a few beers, just two guys in the woods, shooting the breeze, watching the fire crackle. Later that night, when we stepped out on the porch to take a leak, no plumbing out there, we noticed something strange. Down the path where we'd come in, maybe 100 yards away, there was a truck. Not ours. It was parked just off the road, behind some trees, angled in like someone had pulled in fast and tried to hide it. The headlights were off. We couldn't see anyone inside. It was too far and it was dark. At first, we didn't think much of it. Maybe someone from town out hunting, or maybe just someone else who knew about the area. But it stuck in my head. Something about the way it was just sitting there, quiet, no lights, no movement. We watched it for a while, and when nothing happened, we went back inside. The next morning, the truck was gone. I walked down the path a bit, mostly just to calm my nerves, but there were tire tracks. They didn't match Matt's, which had older, worn treads. These were deep and fresh, like whoever it was had peeled out hard. Still, we chalked it up to nothing. It's rural Arkansas. People do what they want out here. We figured maybe it was a poacher or someone who got lost. We spent that day hiking around, checking out old trails. The woods were thick and quiet, birds high in the trees, squirrels darting through the brush. There was a small stream about a mile out where we sat and skipped stones for a while. Nothing felt off during the day. In fact, it felt peaceful. I hadn't been that relaxed in weeks. That night, it was colder. We built a bigger fire and threw some extra wood on it. The wind picked up, rustling the trees just enough to make you think something was moving out there. And then, sometime after dark, we stepped out again, and the truck was back. Same spot, same angle, just sitting there behind the trees. No lights, no sound, like it had never left. We stood on the porch and stared at it for a long time. It felt different this time. The quiet around it was thicker, not peaceful, more like waiting. I remember the way the air felt, still but tense, like holding your breath. Neither of us said anything, we just watched. After 10 minutes or so, we decided to walk over. Not aggressively, just calm and steady. We wanted to get a look. If it was some hunter or squatter, we figured we could talk to them. Worst case, they'd drive off and that would be that. We made it maybe halfway before the truck's engine roared to life. No headlights, no brake lights, just a deep, guttural rumble of an old engine. Then it spun out of the trees in a cloud of dust and gravel, peeled back down the road the way we had come. Fast. We stood there, stunned, listening to it fade out. I still remember the echo of the engine bouncing off the trees. We went back inside, locked the door, pulled the blinds. Neither of us slept well that night. Every crack of a branch or gust of wind made my eyes snap open. I had dreams about that engine sound that moment the truck came to life. In the morning, we called the sheriff's office on Matt's emergency radio. They had to send a signal out from town and patch us in. We gave them the best description we could. Old truck, maybe from the 80s, rust-colored, dented, Arkansas plates, but we couldn't see the numbers. They said they'd send someone out to check, but it would take a couple hours. We waited. Around noon, 2 deputies showed up. They were friendly, but you could tell they didn't think much of our story. They drove the road, walked the area, even checked tire marks. But by then, the gravel had been kicked around too much to make sense of anything. No signs of anyone else being out there. They told us it was probably a local messing with us. Said it happens sometimes. We didn't buy it. Something about it felt too deliberate, too clean, like whoever it was knew the exact distance to stay away, knew when we were watching, knew when to leave. But the deputies didn't find anything, and they left after an hour or two. Matt looked at me after they drove off and just said, "Let's pack up." I didn't argue. We threw everything into the truck in less than 20 minutes. Didn't even eat lunch. The cabin wasn't locked. Never was. But we shut the door behind us and didn't look back. Driving out, I kept checking the side mirrors, waiting for that rust-colored truck to appear behind us. But it never did. We made it back to paved roads by late afternoon and got a signal again about 20 minutes later. I called my girlfriend, told her I'd be home early. We haven't been back to that cabin since. Matt tried to give the place a fresh start once, cleaned it up the next spring, even stocked it with food and supplies. But something about that weekend stuck with us. We didn't talk about it much after. Not because we were scared exactly, but because there wasn't anything else to say. It wasn't ghosts. It wasn't some curse or local legend. It was a person, a real person in a real truck, out there in the woods with us. Someone who never spoke, never showed themselves, just watched, waited, left, came back. And that's what stayed with me the most. It's not what they did. It's what they didn't do. They didn't try to scare us, didn't try to hurt us. Just let us know they were out there. Let us feel what it was like to not be alone, even when we thought we were. Somewhere out there, someone knows that cabin, knows those woods, and for some reason, they wanted us to know it too. We got the message. I'd been looking forward to this trip for months. After a long stretch of working 60-hour weeks in a noisy city, the idea of spending a whole week in a remote cabin in the Adirondacks was the perfect escape. I'd found it on an obscure rental site, a little cabin nestled in the middle of the woods, miles away from the nearest neighbor. It seemed like the kind of place that would be perfect for unwinding. Clean, cozy, private. It had everything: rustic charm with modern amenities. The whole back-to-nature vibe that people like me crave when the city feels like it's swallowing you whole. When I arrived, the place was exactly as advertised. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by thick woods, tall pines swaying gently in the breeze. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dirt driveway that led up to it. The wooden structure was a bit weathered, but it looked sturdy, a little cabin with a small front porch, complete with rocking chairs. It had been recently renovated, with fresh wood floors and new appliances. The owner had left a note on the counter with some basic instructions, a guide to the area, and her contact number. It was just me. No friends, no family. I was alone. I liked it that way. There was something peaceful about being in nature, surrounded only by the sound of birds, wind, and the occasional creak of the trees. I spent the first day exploring the property, walking through the woods, taking in the scenery, and soaking in the solitude. The cabin was peaceful, but I couldn't help but notice one thing when I was unpacking. In the corner of the living room, there was a hatch in the floor. It was an old-fashioned thing, round, made of wood, and secured with a thick padlock. It seemed out of place in an otherwise charming cabin. I figured it was just for storage, maybe a crawl space or something, but the lock seemed strange, unnecessary. There was no note or explanation, just the locked hatch. I shrugged it off. Not my business, right? I wasn't about to start snooping into things that didn't concern me. I spent the rest of the day getting comfortable, lighting a fire in the stone fireplace and enjoying the quiet. But when night came, something changed. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on at first, just a subtle unease that crept in like a shadow. The smell, for one thing, was off. I hadn't noticed it earlier, but by nightfall, there was a faint, cloying odor in the air. It was sweet but rotten at the same time, a bit like meat left out for too long. I chalked it up to the cabin being in the woods. Maybe something had died nearby, or there were critters in the walls. I tried not to think about it. I went to bed, the noise of the wind howling through the trees making the cabin feel even more isolated. The bed was comfortable, and I eventually drifted off, despite the faint smell in the air. The next few days were uneventful, at least at first. I woke early, made coffee, and spent my days hiking the trails nearby, taking in the peaceful wilderness. The smell lingered, though. It wasn't overpowering, but it was always there, hanging in the air like a ghost I couldn't see. It wasn't until the third night that things really started to get strange. I was sitting in the living room, reading a book by the fire, when I heard it, a dull banging sound coming from below. At first, I thought it was just the house settling. Old houses make noises all the time, but this was different. It wasn't the usual creaks of the floorboards or the wind pushing against the roof. It was rhythmic, almost deliberate, like something was tapping, knocking from below. I froze, listening carefully. There it was again, a slow, steady thump, like a heavy object hitting the ground, followed by a faint scraping noise. I couldn't tell if it was coming from beneath the floor or somewhere outside, but it made my skin crawl. I didn't know what to make of it. Maybe it was just an animal, I told myself. But the more I listened, the more I realized it wasn't an animal. There was a pattern to the sound. It was almost purposeful. I couldn't bring myself to check it out that night. It was getting late, and I didn't want to wander outside in the dark. Besides, I convinced myself that whatever it was nothing to worry about. Probably some rodent or a tree branch knocking against the cabin. The next morning, the smell was worse. It wasn't just faint anymore, it was overpowering. It had seeped into the cabin, clinging to the walls, the furniture, the air itself. The sweet, rotten stench filled my nose and throat, making me gag. I tried opening the windows to air out the place, but it didn't help. The smell seemed to come from below, from wherever that hatch was. I wanted to check it out, but I was too uncomfortable. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was down there wasn't something I wanted to find. I had breakfast and tried to distract myself by going for a walk. The woods were peaceful, as usual, but I couldn't get the thought of the cabin out of my head. When I came back, there was something else. Scratch marks. Fresh, deep gouges on the wooden floor, near the hatch. I bent down to get a closer look, running my fingers over the rough grooves. They looked almost like claw marks, jagged and uneven. The air around the hatch was heavy, thick with that awful smell. That night, the banging came again. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't animals. There was something or someone down there, and they were trying to get out. I didn't know what to do. I thought about calling the owner, but I couldn't bring myself to. The cabin was supposed to be a retreat, a place of peace, but now it felt like a prison. I decided I couldn't stay another night. The whole place felt off, and I was starting to feel trapped. The thought of being alone in that cabin with whatever was underneath it made me feel nauseous. I packed my things quickly, not bothering to take anything more than the essentials. The smell was worse than ever as I walked through the cabin, making my way to the door. My heart was pounding in my chest. I knew I had to leave, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was forgetting something. The hatch. The locked hatch. My eyes kept drifting back to it as I made my way out, but I forced myself to look away. It was too much. Whatever was down there, I didn't want to know. I left the keys on the counter, grabbed my bag, and drove away as fast as I could, not looking back. The drive was a blur. I just wanted to be as far away from that cabin as possible. The next few days were a blur of frustration. I tried reaching out to the owner, but I got no response. I sent her several messages asking about the strange noise, the smell, the scratch marks near the hatch. I told her I felt uncomfortable and that I didn't feel safe staying there anymore. Finally, weeks later, I got a reply. She apologized for the delay, claiming she had been out of town, and said that I was the only one who had ever mentioned anything strange about the cabin. She said there was nothing under the floor, that it was just a storage space, and that the noises were probably caused by the house settling. As for the smell, She said it might have been a dead animal nearby, though she didn't seem too concerned about it. I didn't buy it. It didn't feel like a dead animal, and it didn't feel like the house settling. It felt like something else. But what could I do? The owner seemed convinced that everything was fine, and I had no proof to show her otherwise. I never went back to that cabin. I don't know what was down there, and part of me doesn't want to know. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe it was something else. But I'm convinced now that there's something beneath that cabin. Something locked away. Something that isn't supposed to be freed. My buddy and I had been planning the trip for months. We both needed a break from everything. Work, people, phones, city noise, just all of it. He'd found a small cabin for rent on a quiet lake a few hours north, out past where the GPS usually cuts out. Real old-school kind of place. No internet, no TV, no cell signal. It was the sort of cabin that still had one of those old crank windows and a screen door that slammed hard if you let it. The guy we rented it from was a retired logger who lived in town. He said the cabin had been in his family for decades, and he mostly rented it out to hunters and folks just trying to get away for a while. We packed up my truck with the basics: coolers of food, sleeping bags, a couple of camping stoves, beers, a stack of firewood, fishing poles. We even brought our own fuel just in case, since we didn't know what would be available nearby. It was late October, the air getting colder by the day. We figured we'd stay 3 nights, maybe 4 if things felt good. Just a couple of guys, some cold beers, long talks, and quiet. The cabin itself sat right on the edge of the lake. It had a small front porch with a couple of old wooden chairs and a view that looked straight across the water to a wall of trees that hadn't been touched in decades. It was peaceful. The first night, we unpacked, cooked a simple meal on the propane stove inside, and sat out on the porch listening to loons call across the lake. The place didn't have much. Just 2 small bedrooms with thin mattresses, a main room with a stone fireplace, a tiny kitchen, and a narrow bathroom with plumbing that rattled when you turned the faucet. Everything smelled like pine and old dust. What it did have, sitting on the shelf above the little kitchen table, was a radio. One of those old portable ones with a scratched plastic face and a faded sticker that probably used to be a brand name. It had a wire antenna half bent out of shape and a little compartment in the back for D-batteries. We used it the first night to tune into a local weather station. The reception was rough, crackling static and warbled voices, but we got the basic forecast. Cold, maybe a light rain, nothing major. The second day passed without much of note. We slept in, ate eggs and bacon, hiked a short loop trail that wrapped around part of the lake, then spent the evening fishing off a short wooden dock just down the slope from the cabin. The air was crisp, and everything felt normal. We saw some deer tracks near the tree line and heard something splashing around a ways down the lake. Probably a beaver or a muskrat, we figured. We were out there to be disconnected, and that's exactly how it felt. Like we were the only people in the world. That second night, though, things started to feel different. It was sometime after midnight when the radio turned on. We had already gone to bed. I'd been lying there, not quite asleep, just thinking. My buddy was across the hall in the other bedroom, and the cabin was dead quiet except for the occasional creak of the wooden walls cooling down. Then came this low hissing noise, almost like air escaping a tire. Took me a second to realize it was the sound of the radio coming on. I got up and walked into the main room, not really sure what I was hearing. The radio sat there on the kitchen shelf, the dial glowing faint orange. Static poured out of it, loud enough that it should have woken both of us, but my buddy hadn't come out yet. I stood there, staring at it, thinking maybe it had some kind of timer or alarm built in. I reached out and turned the knob to shut it off. The static stopped. I figured maybe one of us had accidentally bumped it or something. I was halfway back to bed when it spoke. The radio clicked back on. No crackle this time, just a flat, steady hum. Then a voice. A man's voice, low and clear. "Get out." I stopped cold. My mouth dried up immediately. It wasn't a radio DJ and it wasn't a weather update. It was too plain, too direct. No background music, no call letters. Just that voice, calm as anything. I stood there, frozen. It only said those 2 words. Then the radio went dead again. I didn't move for what felt like a full minute. I was waiting, listening for something. Footsteps outside, laughter from the woods, something that would let me tell myself it was a prank. But there was nothing, just stillness. Eventually, I turned and went to my buddy's door and knocked. He opened up, rubbing his eyes. I told him what happened, and we both stood there, looking at the radio like it might start talking again. He asked if I was messing with him. I could tell he didn't believe me fully. Not yet. I didn't push it. We agreed to leave it off for the night and went back to our rooms. About 10 minutes later, it turned on again. This time, we both heard it. The static came first, a rising wave of noise like a storm starting. Then the voice, louder this time, firmer. "You're not safe." That's all it said. Those 3 words, clear as day, the same voice as before. We both stood in the doorway of my room, looking toward the shelf. I remember my buddy stepping into the kitchen and yanking the radio off the shelf. He opened the back and pulled the batteries out. He held them up to me like proof. "No power," he said. "It shouldn't be running." But it still was. The radio was still on. The static came back again, but the voice didn't speak a third time. We just stood there, the 2 of us in a cold cabin with no power source in the radio, and it was still running. That's when my buddy dropped it on the table. Not a hard throw, just a solid clunk like he wanted it away from him. We didn't talk much after that. We packed up a few essentials. Wallets, keys, phones that didn't work, but they felt better to have, and we got in the truck. Didn't bother packing the rest of the gear, just left it all. It was a 4-hour drive back to the city. Neither of us said a word until we were halfway there. Even then, we didn't talk about what happened. We just drove. I remember watching the headlights roll over empty road, trees rushing past in the dark, and every few minutes I'd glance in the rear view, half expecting someone to be sitting in the bed of the truck. We got back around dawn. I dropped my buddy off at his place, went straight to my apartment, and slept for half the day. The next time we talked, a couple days later, it was mostly small talk. Neither of us wanted to bring up the cabin. Not yet. But about a week after that, my buddy called me late at night. He'd gone back out there, said he couldn't stop thinking about it and wanted to prove it was just a busted radio, maybe something electrical. He didn't tell me he was going until after. He said the cabin was just as we left it. Our gear still inside, food starting to rot, the firewood stack untouched. The radio was gone, shelf empty. He looked all over, said maybe the owner came by and took it or someone else broke in. Nothing else was missing, though, not even our cooler full of beer. That part shook me more than the voice did. I didn't go back. I didn't want to, not because of ghosts or anything like that. I don't believe in ghosts, but something happened out there, something we couldn't explain, and I'm fine never knowing exactly what it was. Could have been some kind of signal hijack, some local messing with us, or a weird power surge. I don't know, but the way it felt, the way the air seemed to shift in that moment, the way every hair on my body stood up when that voice came through, you don't forget a feeling like that. It's been over a year now. I still think about it sometimes. I don't go off-grid much anymore, not like I used to. I'll still hike, still camp, but I stay where there's people, where there's noise. Something about that silence sticks with you, like your ears are waiting to catch something again. The owner of the cabin never contacted us, didn't ask about the damage, didn't check on the gear we left behind. It was like it never happened, like that weekend never existed. But I still have a photo on my phone from when we first got there. Me and my buddy standing in front of the lake, arms around each other, big grins on our faces. I look at that picture sometimes and it feels like it was someone else entirely. I've got no answers, just the memory of a radio that spoke without power, and a voice that didn't ask, didn't explain, just told us what we already knew deep down, that something wasn't right, and that it was time to go. My friend owns this tiny hunting cabin way up in northern Wisconsin. It's about as remote as it gets, miles off any paved road, surrounded by thick woods and marshy lowlands, way past where GPS even helps. I had been struggling with writer's block for weeks, and he offered the place for a solo retreat. knowing I needed somewhere quiet. I said yes without thinking twice. The idea of isolation, no internet, no cell phone buzzing every hour, it sounded perfect. The drive took me nearly 8 hours from home. The last 40 minutes were on rough gravel and dirt, weaving between towering pines and half-frozen puddles. I had to park my car about a quarter mile from the cabin and hike the rest in with my gear strapped to my back. Food, clothes, some writing notebooks, a few paperbacks, and a couple jugs of drinking water. The cabin was as he described. Small, single room with a sleeping loft, a wood stove in the corner, propane lamps, and not much else. There was a little outhouse out back, and a rusted old metal bin for storing firewood. The nearest neighbor, he told me, was at least 5 miles through the woods. I didn't expect to see a soul for the next several days. I settled in fast. The first 2 days were mostly spent getting used to the silence. It's a heavy kind of quiet out there. No traffic, no humming appliances, not even birds sometimes. Just the wind and the crack of trees settling. I split some wood and got the stove going. It heated up quick, and the place felt cozy in that rustic, rough way. I cooked simple stuff, canned soup, pasta, rice, and beans. I wrote by propane light at the little table under the front window. Nights came early and deep. The woods swallowed the last light quick, and when it got dark out there, it got dark. Not the kind of dark you get in town or even in a quiet suburb. This was true blackness. No glow on the horizon, just shadows on shadows, and the sound of wind brushing branches. By the third night, I was in the rhythm of things. I'd write until I got tired, read for a bit, then climb the ladder to the loft and sleep under heavy blankets. It was cold, dropping into the 20s each night, but the stove kept it comfortable if I fed it right. That night, I stayed up later than usual. I had a good flow going and didn't want to stop. I had a pot of coffee on the stove and pages spread out all over the table. It must have been close to midnight. The fire was down to a low glow, just enough to keep things warm, and I had the main propane lamp on low. The air was still, not even the usual creak of the trees. I don't know what made me look up. It wasn't a sound, there wasn't one. It was just that sudden, crawling feeling you get, the one that tells you something's off. Like when you wake up in the middle of the night and just know someone's in the room with you. I looked over my shoulder toward the front window, and there it was, a face, right there, on the other side of the glass, lit faintly by the soft yellow glow of the lamp behind me. It looked pale, almost gray, and still, completely still. No expression, no movement, just eyes looking in. I couldn't tell if it was male or female, young or old. Just a face, almost pressed to the window. I froze. My body locked up like my brain hadn't caught up with what my eyes saw. A second passed, then another. I don't know if I screamed or just gasped. I must have made some kind of sound because the next thing I remember, I had knocked over my chair trying to stand. I grabbed my flashlight and threw open the door, stomping out into the snow in my socks, heart pounding. I swung the light around, cutting beams into the trees. Nothing. There was no one. I circled the cabin, shining light into every direction, yelling out, but the forest swallowed the sound like it always does. I went as far as the outhouse, shining into the brush, expecting, hoping, to catch someone running, something to explain it. But there was nothing. No footprints I could see in the snow crust. No sign of anyone. I stood out there for a long time. Too long. My feet were going numb, but I didn't want to go back inside. Every time I looked at the cabin, I imagined that face still staring through the window, watching me from inside now. But eventually, the cold forced me back in. I locked the door, latched the window, and pulled the curtains shut. I kept the flashlight next to me as I sat by the dying fire, heart still thumping hard. I didn't sleep that night, just sat in the chair, blanket wrapped tight, flashlight on my lap, staring at the window curtain until the sky finally turned gray. At first light, I went out to look again. The air was still and bitter cold. The snow had frozen hard overnight, and I could see my own tracks from the night before, clear as anything. My sock prints circling the cabin. The other set of prints stood out right away. Boots. They weren't mine. They were spaced further apart, someone with longer legs, maybe. And they weren't just walking up to the window. They circled, all the way around the cabin, around the back, past the outhouse, then back again, over and over, at least 3 or 4 full laps. They never came from the trail. They never went toward the woods, just a tight circle around and around. I followed them carefully, trying to see where they'd started, but they didn't start anywhere. The first circle started partway around the cabin, like the person had been circling for a while before the snow got soft enough to hold their prints. Or maybe they'd been standing still for a long time, watching, waiting. The tracks ended the same way. No exit trail, just circles ending behind the cabin like the person had vanished. But that's not how it works. People leave prints when they walk away, unless they walked backwards exactly in their own trail the whole way. I suppose that's possible. I guess the rest of the day I kept inside. I wrote nothing, read nothing. Every sound made me jump. I kept the axe near the door and the flashlight in my pocket. I sat by the fire with my boots on, ready to move at any second. I told myself I'd leave the next morning. I didn't sleep again, not really. Just nodded off in short bursts and kept waking up in the middle of them, thinking I'd heard the crunch of snow outside. The next morning I packed, fast. I didn't clean up. I didn't stack the wood. I didn't make coffee. I just grabbed my things, stuffed them into my pack, and left. I didn't look back at the cabin once as I walked through the woods. I kept my flashlight in my hand even though it was broad daylight. The weirdest part? My car was untouched. No prints around it. No signs anyone had been near it. Like they were only interested in the cabin. Or me. I never told my friend. I didn't want to explain it. I still don't know what I'd even say. No ghosts. No glowing eyes. No sounds in the dark. Just someone, somewhere deep in the woods, watching me through the window, walking around and around my little cabin in the snow. And I still don't know why. I needed a break. Work had been grinding me down, and the thought of one more day staring at spreadsheets under flickering fluorescent lights made my skin itch. I found a listing online for a remote cabin in Vermont. It looked perfect, small, tucked into the woods, miles from the nearest town. No neighbors, no traffic, no noise, just me and some trees. I booked it for a long weekend in February, thinking the snow would only add to the peace and quiet. The drive was long and winding. The last stretch was up a narrow, snow-covered road that hadn't seen a plow in a while. I had chains on the tires just in case, and I needed them. The forest got thicker as I went, and the light started to fade. The cabin finally appeared through the trees, a dark shape against the white snow. It was smaller than I thought, but sturdy-looking. Real wood beams, old stone chimney, simple porch. No lights on, of course. I parked close, unloaded my stuff, and crunched through the snow to the door. The lock was stiff, but it worked. Inside was cold and quiet. A small living area with a wood stove, a beat-up couch, and a tiny kitchen in the corner. One bedroom and a bathroom off the back. No TV, no Wi-Fi, no cell signal. Perfect. I got a fire going, made some soup on the gas burner, and settled in for the night. Before bed, I did a quick check. There were 3 doors total, the front, the back near the kitchen, and one leading out from the bedroom to a tiny deck. I locked all 3, deadbolts and handles. I even pushed on the doors afterward, tugged the knobs a little. All solid. The windows were old and single pane, but they latched. I shut the bedroom door, turned the heater on low, and got into bed with a book. I must have fallen asleep around midnight. The cabin was quiet, the kind of quiet that gets into your head after a while, like your ears are straining for something that isn't there. I remember waking up cold. Not chilly, cold. The kind of cold that bites through blankets. I sat up in bed and noticed the bedroom door was open. I didn't remember opening it. Then I heard the wind. It was faint at first, but steady, coming from the front room. I got up, stepped out into the hallway, and saw the front door wide open. Just open, not swinging or half-cracked. All the way open, letting snow blow in across the floor. The fire in the stove had burned down to glowing coals. My boots were still by the door, untouched. I walked to the door slowly, heart racing. I was barefoot and freezing, but I barely felt it. I looked out into the yard. Nothing, just trees and snow. No lights, no movement, no prints. I stood there for a long time just watching. My breath came out in thick clouds. Eventually, I stepped out onto the porch. I was looking for tracks, signs of something, someone, but the snow was untouched, smooth, powdery, and fresh. The steps had a thin layer like they hadn't been used since the storm earlier that evening. There were no footprints. Mine had already been filled in. I shut the door, locked it, then deadbolted it. Then I checked the back door and the bedroom door again. Both still locked. I pushed on the windows, looked at the latches. Everything looked fine. I even took one of the dining chairs and wedged it under the front doorknob. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I lay in bed, fully dressed under the blankets, just listening. The cabin made sounds. Creaks, groans, little knocks. Old wood shifting with the cold. But each one felt intentional, like footsteps. A slow board creak near the kitchen. A pop from the floorboards in the hall. Once, I thought I heard something brush against the outside wall. I told myself it was just wind, the trees moving, snow falling off the roof. By morning, I felt strung out, eyes dry, nerves buzzing. I made coffee and sat by the stove, wrapped in a blanket, watching the door. Nothing had been touched. My stuff was where I left it. No signs of anything weird except the melted snow inside by the door. I cleaned it up, told myself I must have forgotten to lock the door, even though I knew that wasn't true. I remembered locking it. I tested it. I'd done the same routine at every cabin or motel I'd ever stayed in, and I always double-checked. Always. Still, I stayed. I didn't want to be the guy who ran back to the city over a creaky door. I spent the day outside, snowshoeing through the woods. It helped clear my head. The forest was beautiful, quiet, untouched, just me and the trees. I followed a trail for a while, took some pictures, came back before dusk. The second night, I did the same routine. Locked all doors, double-checked them, put a chair under the front doorknob again. Sat by the fire for a while. I tried reading, but my eyes kept flicking to the windows, watching for movement. That night, I woke up around the same time, 3 a.m. But this time, the door was shut. Still, I had the same feeling, cold air, like something wasn't right. I walked the cabin again, checked the locks. All tight, but I kept hearing things. Scratching sounds. A tap 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 on the far wall. I even heard something like breathing once, but when I held mine, the cabin was dead silent. It went like that the rest of the weekend. The doors stayed shut after that first night, but I kept hearing things. Little noises, always around the same time, always when I was just starting to drift off. I stopped lighting fires at night because I didn't want to fall asleep. I kept a flashlight in my hand in bed, fully clothed, boots by the door. On the last night, I thought I heard footsteps in the snow outside. Just a couple. Crunch, pause, crunch again. I sat by the window for over an hour, watching the tree line. Nothing came out of it. When I left Monday morning, I packed fast. Didn't eat. Just threw everything in the back of the car and took off. I didn't bother cleaning up or putting things back where they were supposed to go. I drove straight through to a gas station an hour away and sat there for a long time, just watching people move around, drink coffee, talk on their phones. It was like stepping out of a dream. Back home, I kept thinking about the door. I knew I'd locked it. I replayed it in my head 100 times. Locking the deadbolt, turning the knob to test it, pushing on the door. I didn't imagine that. But no prints in the snow, nothing missing, nothing broken. I called the rental company later that week and asked about the door. Said it might be loose or something. The woman on the phone was polite but confused. She said they'd never had any issues. That the lock was recently replaced, actually. High quality, she said. Then she added that someone had been out there a few days before me. A solo hiker, same as me. No complaints, but apparently he'd left a day early. No explanation. I don't know what happened that night. I've told myself 100 possible reasons. Maybe the door didn't latch all the way, and a strong gust of wind blew it open. Maybe the lock was faulty, but that doesn't explain the sounds. The feeling of being watched. The way the cabin felt like it wasn't empty, even when I was alone. What gets me most is how quiet it all was. No crashes, no voices, no big dramatic moment. Just a door open to the cold, and no sign of how. No sign of who. Just silence and snow. I've stayed in dozens of cabins before, camped alone in remote places, even slept out under the stars. But I've never felt anything like that weekend. I haven't gone back to Vermont since. I still get the urge to disappear into the woods sometimes, but it's different now. I lock my doors more than once. I keep a light on, even if I don't need it. And when I hear a creak in the floor at 3 a.m., I listen a little longer than I used to. Not because I think it's a ghost or something out of a movie, because sometimes the scariest things don't make a sound at all.